Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. We want to talk about what's going on in the financial markets, particularly internationally speaking. And just recently, this past week, Trump announced there would be tariffs placed on some goods from China. And I saw one headline, this is going to really hurt China, punish China. But you know, there has been a myth that has gone around for a long time, which defies a lot of even mainstream economic thinking, in that tariffs are beneficial and protectionism is good. Most people, both on right and left, have challenged this, but we're right back to it again. It seems like when we get into a little trouble, if we blame foreigners, that'll be the problem, and we don't look to ourselves for the problem. So right now, President Trump issued this executive order that will put 30% tariffs on solar panels coming in from China, as if this is going to solve the problem. But it doesn't look like that is the case, because one thing that goes astray on this argument is they don't say, let's tax imports, let's tax the American people. And how does that work exactly? Why is this really a tax and not something that is a nondescriptive? Oh, it's a tariff and it will protect us and it will be good for jobs and it'll be good for the American consumer.
Yes, well, a lot of this has to do with how it's sold. And real tough, they're going to slap tariffs on China. But what they're doing is they're slapping the American people around. We're the ones that have to pay the tax. Our government doesn't have the authority to just go tax another country. They could tax us, and that's what tariffs are. And we pay the penalty. And the money goes directly to our government. So but it takes a lot of demagoguery to pull this off, to get Americans to actually cheer that their government is going to tax them more. So hopefully we'll help to open a few more eyes today, Dr. Paul.
And there's a big effort, it seems, in this country that the consumer is second rate. They come last, you know, when it comes to things like a weaker dollar, or we need higher inflation, we need 2% inflation. They don't say we want to steal the value of the dollar from the consumers and from the people. But they keep saying they're always going to help the consumer. In this case, they say we're going to save jobs. But I don't think there's very good evidence that they save any jobs. Yeah, maybe they'll make jobs shift. But even on solar panels, there's going to be other people do things. Maybe another country will send them in. Somebody will get around it. And the other thing that they never really count are, what about the secondary jobs for an industry like solar panels? Obviously, you know, we were building a lot of solar panels, and the cost went up. And China came in and they started competing and they were underselling us. Well, what was the problem? Were the taxes too high? Were there too many regulations? Were we inefficient? Or what was the reason? So somebody else builds them cheaper, which is a benefit to the consumer. Now, did all Americans lose their job? No, a lot of Americans became distributors. And there are thousands of people employed distributing these Chinese goods, and nobody seems to care about that, especially the people who are on a tight budget. You know, it's a difference for them on whether they buy these panels or not.
Yes, I'd like to point out that tariffs are totally political. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands, who knows how many different products out there. How did the government come up with solar panels and washers? Did they throw darts against the board and that's what landed on? Or do the owners of the companies that benefit just wake up one day and say, oh, look at that, President Trump just raised taxes on Americans for my benefit? And does he want anything in return for this? So this is all political, and it's not beneficial to us at all.
Well, and it is political, and it's something that we were supposed to get rid of, and that means powerful special interests. The lobbyists have something to say about it, and they do get something. They do donate money, and it happens, it seems like, in every administration, be that cylinder affair occurred under Obama. So it's something that's ongoing, and the special interests are in charge, rather than thinking about freedom and freedom of choice. Actually, I approach this thing from the point of view of personal liberty, because I believe people should have their personal liberty, and it's a natural right, and you have a right to your life, and you have a right to your liberty, and you should have the right to the fruits of your labor. If that were true, then you'd get to spend your money the way you want. And it would be a service to you because you get to buy things at the best price. And you say, oh, well, they might buy foreign goods. That would be a blessing in many ways. Maybe that's because we're not doing a good job here. Maybe we're not efficient enough. There was one time when American cars were much worse than they are today. But they were improved once the Japanese and foreign cars came in, and their quality was much higher. So the incentive is there for improvement just by following the market and allowing people the right to spend the money the way they want.
Yes. Dr. Paul, as I look at social media, there are a lot of people that support these measures. And I don't know if it reminds me of when President Obama was in and he was bombing everybody and the Democrats were totally silent. Well, now Trump he's doing the same thing foreign policy wise, and he's now raising taxes on the goods that we buy, and his voters are silent. And it's almost as if there's this fear out there that if you call your president out, that you're in love with the Democrats all of a sudden. It doesn't mean that. You just stand on principle, and if your president is doing something wrong, it shouldn't matter which party that he's a part of. And but that, it's very hard for people to do that.
Yes, and it is very helpful if people understand what's going on, because they are really against an import that is cheap because it's been subsidized. And that's a mixed blessing. Maybe if you concede that maybe the other things are equal. But what if a company subsidizes a product and takes a product that costs $100 down to $50 because there's a cost to the other government and others? Should you not buy that product? Well, in a way, let's say the product's $100. And that's what it would cost for us to make it. And the foreigners get subsidized and they sell it to us for $50, and you get the same product, just theoretically. You get the same product, but you have $50 left over, so your standard of living goes up, and then there's a bigger incentive to compensate. But it's hard for people to see. They say, well, it's a job, but the truth is the jobs shift around, and they move around. There are other things available. If you can't make one thing, you make something else, but it's not instantaneous. But you have to believe in the marketplace and how things adjust when there's voluntarism rather than coercion, because the coercive means that the politicians, especially the executive branch and the president, knows what's best, knows what the prices should be, and he's going to regulate the economy, which I don't believe is true, and we end up with a mess like this. So I think that people should understand much better how the market works and be more trusting in this rather than say, we need to be taken care of. But this is a typical example of the group of politicians calling themselves populists. Populists are greenbackers in general. You can't paint them all this way. They believe in inflation, but a different type. You don't give it to the banks, you just give it to the farmers and the poor, but you print the money anyway. But the other thing is protectionism. And they believe if you just protect our industries, everything will be okay, not realizing probably protectionism is more harmful today than any time in the history, because we have more of a global economy. And what can there be a consequence? We put tariffs on China right now, China's goods, but what about retribution? Trump says, oh no, we're not going to have a trade war. How does he know we're not going to have a trade war? Almost all the time, just for their own sake, they will announce it or do something, because if they just lie back, they'll look bad in their country. So there will be retaliation, but the people who gets punished will be unknown. But ultimately, I am convinced once we get into this mischief, it's the American consumer, whether it's taken away his liberty to buy what he wants, but he gets hurt too with higher prices, and also this does not create jobs. I just predict that all of a sudden, let's say these tariffs stay on for 5 years, I predict that we most likely won't be in the massive business of manufacturing solar panels. There'll be something else come up, because there'll be the inflationary factors, the regulatory factors. There'll be something that will push these costs up, and that there won't be an automatic return or a development of solar panels being manufactured here in the United States.
Yes, I'll close, Dr. Paul, kind of echoing you, because protectionism really comes down with just interfering with our right to deal with whoever we want. We should be able to voluntarily exchange with whoever we want from anywhere in the world, and not have government come in and violently tilt the tables and interfere for the benefit of this person or that person. That's not what the role of government should be. It should protect our ability to deal with whoever we want. That's what government should be, not protect this person versus this person. And as you mentioned, and I don't know who said it, whether it was Bastiat or Thomas Paine, when goods don't cross borders, armies will. And nobody likes being taken advantage of, and they ultimately resort to military means to get what they want. And we should avoid all of this at all costs by just being able to freely trade with whoever we want.
Yeah, yes, Chris, and you make a good point about how we can and what we should do to protect our consumer and our people. To me, it's protection of liberty, but it's also providing for a sound currency so it's not deliberately inflated either to weaken the currency, because that is a policy of weakening a currency, thinking it's going to help our exports. And they allow this to happen because of an illusion that it will be helpful. But this idea that if you have a weaker currency, is something that we participate in all the time because we have the reserve currency of the world, and yet we want to label the Chinese currency manipulators. The dollar is on the ropes right now, and it's been going down sharply last year, and it's continuing. In this past week, when it was going down rapidly, it went down even more rapidly because Mnuchin comes out and says, "Oh, that's a good idea. A weak currency is good. This will help our exporters, but it will punish our consumers. Weaken the dollar, take away value." So they did this. Then the president came along because there was an overreaction. The dollar started going down more rapidly. So the president comes out the next day. "Oh, we didn't really mean that. That's not our position. We want a strong currency." So things bounce back up again for one day, and that's the interference that occurs. So the dollar's back in business going down again. So it's something that is very important, the value of the currencies. Our trade imbalances are horrible, and it's not because it's a free trade imbalance, because there will be fluctuations there, but it's because we get to print the money, we get to export our inflation, we get to buy these goods. So because we get cheap money and it's put in our hands, and we buy goods from China because they're cheaper, and because we're printing too much money, that is not going to be solved by putting on a tax. It would be solved once we have sound money. So we want to protect the American people, but we have to have freedom of exchange. We have to have voluntarism. We have to have the currency. We have to have market interest rates. This is what would create a market economy, and we wouldn't have to worry about these things. But overall, the issue of protectionism has been around for a long time. But in the 20th century, there's been a drift away from the belief of protectionism. And it's only when the interference and the involvement in the economy gives us some downturns on the economy, and then a country like ourselves, we don't want to look to the fallacies that we have and say, "Oh, overtaxation, overregulation, too much printed press money." We say it's somebody else's fault, so we have to punish them. And one intervention leads to another intervention and doesn't address the problem, and that's where we are. And that's why, in spite of the fact it's real easy to sell this bill of goods, that our producers are being hurt by cheaper imports. And one should say, on the long run, you say, well, that is good. That helps the consumer. And besides, it won't really solve the problem of the jobs. Matter of fact, it'll give the incentive. And like I said earlier, a lot of jobs are lost that are associated with these imports. So there's way too much mischief going on. And we have to think, why does the president have this much authority? The president gets up, "Oh, today it's tariffs. I've been talking about tariffs. We're going to put 30% tariffs on China." Let's say, even if it were a good thing and the American people want it, why have we given the president this much power just to arbitrarily do that? We have the president. The president has power to put on sanctions or take off sanctions. So I just don't like economic planning. Economic planning is similar to personal planning on your personal habits and your religious habits, and we don't allow that. So we shouldn't have economic planning. We should provide the environment where people make up their own minds. But to give this authority first to the Congress to deliver to the president and just let him make all these decisions, it's not a good way to run an economy, because we don't want government to run the economy. The people should run the economy, and that's been a proven model. Is the more the people run the economy, the freer they are, the greater the incentives, the better off the economy is. We did have the best over many, many years, and we became the richest country in the world. We still probably are the richest country in the world, but it's not being maintained because we've undermined some of these basic principles. And I'll tell you what, going back to tariffs and maintaining a monetary policy of deliberately destroying the value of the money, that is not going to keep us great. So my suggestion is very clear. Why don't we accept the principles of liberty, sound money, and get the government out of the way, limit the government's role to protecting liberty, and not much else. Have a national defense and a few things like that, but not to get involved in manipulating, in fine-tuning the economy. That's where our problem is, and most people will come back and say, Ron, what are you talking about? The stock market is high. Well, let me tell you, that's part of the imbalance, because that's part of what has led to the maldistribution of wealth. The wealth is being accumulated. It used to be accumulated in the top 20%. Now sometimes there's good analogies when the wealth has been accumulated with 3 top people, or 1% of the economy. That's a result of interventionism, because once the government can intervene, then you invite the lobbyists, and that's why Washington, D.C. is swarming with lobbyists because of tax codes and this whole thing that we've gone through with the tax code. Thousands of pages again to detail it. And I tell you what, if you want real tax reform, you could do it in one page, and that's repeal the 16th Amendment and get rid of the income tax. And believe me, that would be real reform. So someday maybe we will have real reform, because we will have the opportunity, but because the system is not going to pursue the following of the stock market and forever be gaining in wealth, because that's an illusion, and tariffs are an illusion. I hope the American people give this serious thought before they blindly support tariffs dictated by our president. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.